Courtney's introduction to that song, I can't help myself. Okay, so this does not have anything to do with Santa. It does have something to do with Jesus, though. So I ran back there and put this together. All right, so let's see what this looks like. Okay, so have you ever seen the fish on things, right? The Jesus fish or the Christian fish? Okay, and inside sometimes you see Greek letters, and they kind of look like these. I don't have a lot of time, I'm just saying. But just imagine the Greek version of these letters, all right? And this is an acrostic, okay? That's if it was Greek, it would be the word for fish in Greek. And so, but if you take it, it would basically say, it's like an anagram. It's like you go bring that down the side, and it would be Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Right? So it means Jesus. It means a lot of different names, but Jesus stands for that. Now, what is interesting is that if you've ever seen people write the word Christmas and say Xmas, like the letter X. Right? This has been done for years and years and years and years, like hundreds and hundreds of years. And here's why. Because up there, if you see right there, that X stands for the word Christ. It's the Greek letter Chi, right? It's the letter that starts the word Christ. So you abbreviate it, if you are a Greek scholar, or even not, if you just want to be cool, you can abbreviate the word Christ with X, right? And so when people have Xmas, it means Christmas, right? So I think we should keep the X in Xmas. I'm just saying. All right, but that's not what we're talking about today. Are Jesus and Satan on the same team? I mean, not Satan. Great. It's going to be a long night. Oh, wow. Okay. Are Jesus and Santa on the same team? All right, so Santa's name, Santa Claus, it's got a very long history, right? Getting to this name, Santa Claus, right? So Santa Claus really kind of grew out of a moment in history where two different names and ideas, two different names came together. It wasn't very long ago this happened. It was in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Sinterklaas and Father Christmas. Okay, so in Western Europe, those two ideas, those two names merged together and traveled across the ocean to be Santa Claus. Now, and what's interesting is there was this 19th century Christmas book that came out highlighting Sinterklaas, right? And it was all about how he rode a horse through the sky and how he dropped presents down the chimney. And it was a really great book, super, super popular. And it was the book that was responsible for the surge in popularity because Sinterklaas was outlawed in the 16th and 17th century. Okay, Sinterklaas was outlawed in the 16th and 17th century because that was during the Protestant Reformation, and Sinterklaas was part of a tradition in the Catholic Church. And Martin Luther, who is a really great early church father, also very opinionated, also probably one of the biggest egos in all of church history, and that's saying something. All right, so he really didn't like that, and he wanted to make a break with the Catholic Church with the whole Protestant deal. So he made sure that everybody knew that he didn't think you should have Sinterklaas. Instead, he made another concept called the Christkindl, which means the Christ child. And he says that Christmas is all about the Christ child and not about Sinterklaas. It's interesting, that little piece is interesting because Christkindl, that word kind of evolved over time and eventually became Kris Kringle. So it all comes back around. The thing that he got as a protest to Sinterklaas, and eventually it means Santa Claus. So it was outlawed in the 16th and 17th century, and so 19th century is when it really became popular again. But what was outlawed was the celebration of St. Nicholas Day. St. Nicholas Day is December the 6th. And so by my calculation, that is 4 days from now. Okay? So St. Nicholas Day is December the 6th. St. Nicholas is the character, or Sinterklaas is the character that is part of St. Nicholas Day. Sinterklaas is. And so Sinterklaas comes in often on a ship. If you go in different parts of Europe that have these big St. Nicholas parades, he comes in on a ship because he is the patron saint of seafarers. And so Sinterklaas comes in on a ship all the times, and he's got a ship full of gifts to give out to everybody. But that's part of St. Nicholas Day. And St. Nicholas Day is all about this guy, St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas is a really, really interesting guy. Now, in recent history, there has been some people, some professors in colleges that questioned whether or not this guy, St. Nicholas, who lived between 200 and 300 years, the year 200 and 300, somewhere in there, whether or not this guy was real. And so they would say, it's hard to historically prove whether or not this guy, St. Nicholas, was actually around. And that's interesting. It's a claim that is not uncommon. As a matter of fact, if you go into the right professor's class in college, he might actually stand up and say, you cannot historically prove that Jesus existed. And he would be correct. He would be correct. Because there is a list of criteria for proving whether or not somebody existed in history, right? And so and it involves first-hand sources that are not part of, his kind of club of people, and independently verified things, and just a whole list of things that make it difficult for a whole lot of people historically to be verified whether or not they actually existed. And poor St. Nicholas, he was one of those guys for a long time. He didn't meet the criterion for saying, yeah, this guy actually existed. And then there was a really great day. There's this guy named Father Gerardo Ciaffari. Now, Father Gerardo Ciaffari, he is a monk at the St. Nicholas Basilica in St. Nicholas's hometown, and where he served most of his life. So they have a lot of really great documents about St. Nicholas, and it was his life work to pour through all those documents and to set forth a really good history of who St. Nicholas was. And it was just a couple of years ago that he came out with some really great documentation of St. Nicholas. And I gotta stress, this is documentation that's like from the year 300, right, or 400. And so this is really old stuff. So what happened is he found a history of St. Nicholas that referred to a book that was written at the time, really right after St. Nicholas died. And so it's seen by historians as saying, we can be pretty sure that this guy, St. Nicholas, was actually around. And that's important because St. Nicholas, right after the end of that kind of reign when he was around, there was, before then, nobody named their kid Nicholas. Nobody. And then, all of a sudden, in that region of the world, right around where he lived, you saw Nicholas everywhere in all of these different church records. And within just a couple of hundred years, St. Nicholas was the most painted saint, the most depicted saint of any of the saints except Mary. So St. Nicholas is super, super popular. He is the most depicted saint. Now, so here's the deal. What actually actually happened, though, in his life, it's somewhere between fact and legend. Most all of it. You know, because he didn't write anything himself, because he, wasn't somebody like Jesus, that level of important figure. You've got a lot of variance in the stories about St. Nicholas's life. But what we can say is he was an important guy. He was very important to the development of Christianity. And at this time of year, I think it's really important to know who he was. Because he is the beginning of what eventually is Santa Claus. And I don't know if you've noticed, Santa Claus is kind of a big deal right here, right? Especially at this time of year. And I think for us to answer the question, are Jesus and Santa on the same team? I think we really need to know who Santa Claus, the St. Nicholas guy, actually was. So, all right, let me tell you about his birth. St. Nicholas was born, his mother, and it's kind of seen as a miraculous birth at the time, in that his mother had St. Nicholas, and she never had another child after him. And the way that they understood being born was that they thought of it like baking bread, right? And so if you've ever heard having a bun in your oven, that's where that idea comes from. They really thought that it was like when you baked bread in an oven. And so, very, very special people like St. Nicholas, very holy, holy people, when they were born, it was so hot that it actually broke, right? And so, you couldn't have kids after them because of the holiness of the child that was given. And so, that's part of why the tradition began that Jesus didn't have any siblings, was because of this kind of understanding of the way the reproductive system works, right? So, that's what happened with St. Nicholas. He was born, and it's said that it was one of these miraculous kind of births that was indicative of how important and how righteous St. Nicholas was, that his mother didn't have any other kids. Now, he was born into a very, 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 very wealthy family. And because he was born into a wealthy family, it meant that he had a really great education. And so he was a very well-educated, very intelligent guy. But the really great thing about his family is that they were incredibly religious. They woke up before dawn and went and celebrated communion before dawn every Sunday. Right, that's going to church before the sun goes up. I prefer this kind of, like sleep in and have an evening worship service, right? So anyway, before dawn, they went every week. Now, St. Nicholas had a difficult childhood in that when he was about 18, both of his parents died. And so when his parents died, the good thing was that they left him a very large inheritance. Okay, so he was set for life, right? He had a large inheritance, and he dealt with his family's passing well. He knew that they were in heaven. He had no doubt of that. And he spent a long time seeking God over this idea of inheritance. And also, because he didn't have his mom and dad, over really what he should do with the rest of his life. So he prayed for a very long time about that. And he came to this realization that his life and his money should be spent the same way. And that is, however God wants to use it. That he wasn't going to use his life and his money on himself. That he was going to use it on whatever God showed him. And so he began to work a whole lot with the church. And began to prepare to go into ministry as a career. And so it was during this time that he is walking around the city, and he finds out that there are these three girls. There's a father who has three daughters, and the father is desperately poor. So poor that he is not going to be able to have a dowry for his daughter. And that is a huge deal. You see, in that culture, when your daughter came of age, you had to have a dowry for her. And then she could be married, right? And if not, if you didn't have a dowry, she could not be married. And then she would have to work and make money on her own. Problem is, the only way for a woman to make her own money in that culture was to sell herself. So he finds out that this father, who's desperately poor, is facing a really horrific reality, right? He's not going to have money to have a dowry for his oldest daughter, and she's going to have just the worst life imaginable. So on the eve of his daughter's coming of age, St. Nicholas takes some of his money, puts it in a purse, and in the middle of the night he goes and he drops it through the window. So the next morning, the father and the daughters wake up, and on the day that she comes of age, he has to have a dowry for her. It's there on their floor when they wake up. He has two other daughters. So the second daughter, it's the same thing happens. Some time passes, and this guy is still desperately poor. St. Nicholas knows about it, so he goes and he does the same thing. On the eve, he drops it through the window. The next day, the father wakes up. So the time the third daughter comes around, the father wants to know who it is that's been giving him this gift. And so, like children have done for years and years, he stays up all night. Right? He sits in his kitchen. He stays up all night, hoping to catch a glimpse of who it is that has been giving this money to him. And in the middle of the night, St. Nicholas comes, he passes it through the window, and the father comes out and he thanks him profusely. And St. Nicholas's response is very simple. He says, "You're welcome. Please don't tell anybody it was me." If you ever go on Jeopardy, this is an important story to know, because if you've ever seen a pawn shop, right? If you've ever seen the thing that's got the three things, and there's three little circles, right? That is a symbol of St. Nicholas, who is the patron saint for thieves, pawnbrokers, all kinds of people, and that's his symbol. And it refers to this story, actually. So the three dowries, the three persons of St. Nicholas. So at that time, this was not a time that was really a great time to be a Christian as far as your safety is concerned. As a matter of fact, there was a moment somewhere after this three dowry story happened where the bishop of the area was martyred, along with a couple hundred other Christians. And so there's the seat of the bishop in that area is open, and so other bishops come to pray and seek God and say, okay, who is it that you want us to install here as a bishop? So they pray, and then nothing comes of it, and so they go to bed. In the middle of the night, one of the bishops is awoken with a vision. And God says to him in that vision, he says, look, take the other bishops, go into the sanctuary and pray. And the next person who walks through the door, that is the new bishop, right? So he gets up, he wakes up the other bishops, they go into the sanctuary, and they wait. And as St. Nicholas was accustomed to doing, he was walking the streets that morning and saying in morning prayer, and he walks into the church, and he's very young at the time, about somewhere around 35 years old. And that bishop sees him, grabs him, takes him inside, and tells him the whole story, and they install him as bishop that day. So St. Nicholas is the bishop at this point, which is a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal in a lot of ways, right? You know, it's a huge responsibility, and it's very dangerous to be a Christian and a church leader. And so there's a moment there where there's just this massive campaign to arrest church leaders. And so it's not very long. I mean, St. Nicholas just barely gets his feet on the ground and gets kind of the idea of this job, under control. And that he goes and he's arrested and he's put in prison for being a Christian, for being a bishop, actually. And so then this guy, but this is a pivotal moment in history for a lot of reasons, including this guy named Constantine. Constantine is a super important figure, not only in history, but in church history. Okay, so what happens with Constantine is he is like this leader, right? This Roman leader. He's going to battle, and he sees this vision, right? And it's a vision, he says, of Jesus, and it says, in hoc signo eris. I can't remember the rest of it, but I took Latin in high school. We had to learn it. But if you've ever seen IHS on something at a church, that's what it is. It's the sign of Constantine. And basically what it's saying is Jesus says, look, he shows him a picture of an image of the cross. It says, in this sign you will conquer. And so Constantine has all of his soldiers draw a cross on their shields, and they go into battle, and they win, and he converts, and he's a Christian. Right? And he makes Christianity the state religion, right? So Christianity goes just overnight from you could be arrested because you're a Christian to we are the religion of the world at that point, right? That little known world right there. So Constantine releases St. Nicholas from prison. And it's not very long into it that Constantine organizes a very, very important meeting of Christian leaders called the Council of Nicaea. Council of Nicaea is brought together for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons that they're brought together is because there is a controversy. There's a piece of belief that is coming under fire from a guy named Arius. Arius is trying to convince people that Jesus was not fully divine, that he was not fully God. And, we're not going to go into this whole idea, but basically as Christians, we believe that Jesus is somehow, mysteriously, mystically, both fully human and fully God in one person. But that was up for debate at that point. So they have this council, they debate it, and Arius is there making his case, saying these crazy things. Jesus isn't God, all this kind of stuff. And the tradition, now this is one of the kind of outlandish stories about St. Nicholas, is that he was there, and that is we're pretty sure that he was there. There's about 300 people there. There's several lists that have 200 people. He's not in those. But of the lists that have 300 people, St. Nicholas is in it. So, St. Nicholas is at the Council of Nicaea. Arius is making his case. And the tradition is that St. Nicholas walks up as Arius is spewing these heresies, and he slaps him across the face. Which is not behavior becoming a bishop. And so, at that moment, the story goes that at that moment, the gathered bishops said, you can't be a bishop. And then Mary and Jesus appear next to him, and they say, no, he should be a bishop. And they make him visit back. Whatever. It's a good story. But it tells you, it gives us a key, an insight into what people believed his character to be, right? He was about standing up for what you believed in, right? He was about not sitting by and allowing somebody to spew forth lies and heresy and to say these kind of things about his God. So, that's the Council of Nicaea. But, so the question with St. Nicholas, and with really any of these, really old, dead saint people, is why does it matter? And why should we even talk about this kind of stuff, right? Well, when you look at St. Nicholas, I think it's clear that St. Nicholas's life is a life of giving. And the reason we look at their lives is because of the scripture. This is Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. It says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders, and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run the race with perseverance, the race marked out for us." And so what the writer of Hebrews is saying is that there is this cloud of witnesses. There is all of these people who have gone before us. And when we look at them, when we look back at these people that have gone before us, it tells us that it's possible. Right? When we are in the middle of the thick of life, that can seem like a very tedious race sometimes. When we are in this difficult moment where we think, how can I ever possibly get through this? When we're at that place where we are questioning the ability to complete what God has called us to, we can look back. We can see the people that have gone before us and we can say, I don't know how. It's possible. And Nicholas is an incredibly great sample of this. And this is why. If you look back at the saints from this time, a lot of the stories seem like Aesop's fables. They couch it in religious terms, but it sounds like magic. But the beautiful thing about St. Nicholas is that there's not a lot of magic. There's not a lot of outlandish things in the story of the three dowries, right? It's not a story where Nicholas finds out about these virgins, these girls that are going to be coming of age, and then magically he prays to God and magically money appears on the floor. No. Nicholas, he's an ordinary saint. He sees the need, and he takes his own money, and in the middle of the night, he walks to their window and drops it through. There's nothing magic about that. There's nothing outlandish about that. He's just a guy who had a great deal of money, and when he saw a need, he met it. And so I think that is the most beautiful thing about this guy, St. Nicholas, is that he's just like us. He never prayed and saw fire come down from heaven. That didn't happen. He saw some people who were hungry, and so he gave them money. As a matter of fact, what happened oftentimes, people left their shoes outside their doors in this area, and so when he would find out about a need, he would go in the middle of the night, and he would take the money that would meet that need, and he'd drop it in the shoes of the people in the middle of the night. And they wake up the next morning, and they would put on their shoes and realize that God had provided. But here's what I think is instructive to us. I think he's a model for how we should give. First off, he gave where he saw a need. He didn't say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this money. I'm going to give 10% of it to this church over here and let them do what they want. And I have 20% of it to this organization. He didn't do that. The way he gave is he saw a need. It was very personal. Right? He was made aware of some sort of need, and he gave to meet it. And here's the other thing, and this is the even more important thing, and probably the most difficult piece. He gave anonymously. In the middle of the night. People thought maybe it was St. Nicholas who was putting this money in their shoes. They didn't know. It could be anyone. Because his giving was not about him. So, who is Santa Claus? Who is St. Nicholas? Well, St. Nicholas is a person whose life was a life of giving. his whole life. And I think if you look at Santa Claus, that is who he is. Right? The story of Santa Claus is a guy who him and all of his employees spend all year getting ready to give to other people. The story of Santa Claus is the story of a person who spends his entire life giving to others. And see, that, if you want to know if they're on the same team, a life of giving, that is who Jesus was. He was a person who gave his whole life, even his life itself on the cross. And the thing that's curious to me about the whole Santa Claus thing at this time of year is we've got this great example of St. Nicholas and of Santa Claus who spends his whole life giving to other people. But somehow we've taken that incredible example and we've made it about us, about what we get. Right? And so no, this is not, the story of Santa Claus is not something that allows us to spend all year and all of what we have and all of what we can do to give to other people. It's about, what are you getting this Christmas? Instead of modeling our lives after him, we've somehow confused the whole idea and made it about what we get. So, here's the challenge. Will you honor St. Nicholas this year? Right, this amazing Christian who lived a couple thousand years ago, just about. Would you pattern yourself in your giving this Christmas after him? Right? We all know people. There are people in our world that we know who have lost a job, who are having a difficult time, right? We all know people who need something. So St. Nicholas would say, look, you can meet that need. Meet it. But don't let them know it was you. So that's the challenge. Will you meet a need and do it anonymously? Not, I'm going to buy all your Christmas presents, and then I'm going to show up at your house, and I'm going to bring all the presents so I get all the credit. No. Will you honor the anonymous giving, this life of giving that St. Nicholas has modeled for us this Christmas? I hope you will. I'm going to try. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the great cloud of witnesses. We thank you for all of these people, including St. Nicholas, who have gone before us, who loved you and used their life to serve you. We thank you for them. So this Christmas, over the next couple of weeks, would you help us to honor this brother in Christ who went before us? Allow us to notice the needs in our world, and then, as we notice them, would you help us to remember the man St. Nicholas? Would you give us what we need, the opportunity, the time, the resources to meet that need anonymously? That you would be the only one who could get the credit this Christmas.